And it's interesting to understand that this phenomenon of the housing bubble, there's this guy, Dean Baker, who works for the Center for Economic Policy Research, who talks about how for 100 years, the real estate values and income of the American people sort of tracked each other. You know, it might be in one neighborhood that you'd have gentrification and all of a sudden real estate values would shoot up and people would be driven out, and that's not good. But that wasn't system-wide. For 100 years, incomes and real estate values kind of tracked each other. It was only about a dozen years ago, he says, that the real estate prices started shooting up while incomes remained stagnant for the majority of us. And then, of course, it crashed back down. Now we've discovered that not only did that happen, and it was certainly not a normal market fluctuation, but that the banks deliberately created the housing bubble, and they knew it would crash. And how could it not crash? After all, it was a Ponzi scheme that was dependent on something that was utterly impossible to sustain, ever-rising income values at a rate faster than people's incomes. So they knew it was going to crash. And when it did crash, they captured literally millions of people, now 11 million homeowners, in underwater loans. Houses that are worth less than a loan. For our members, sometimes worth half of the loan, or even a third of the loan, if you can believe it. A couple of years ago, real values in the 02121 zip code area were 30% of peak value. So that is a dramatic reduction. Now, when we look at what at the individuals who are involved in this crisis, certainly it's been pointed out adequately that many people were caught in predatory loans, meaning loans such that you get a teaser rate and then the rate goes up. And people kind of say, well, why didn't you read the fine print in that inch-thick sheet of documents that you have 30 minutes to read? But it really wasn't just predatory loans like that. The thing that trapped people was an entire predatory lending environment. That even people who got fixed-rate mortgages, who bought if you lived in Dorchester and you bought any old house in Dorchester, you didn't buy more house than you could afford, you bought any old house in Dorchester where your housing costs were the same as if you were going to rent. You bought that house, but at a wildly inflated price. And maybe you said to the bank, I'm not sure I can afford that. And the bank said, sure you can, we'll refinance you in 6 months. But then the housing bubble burst and all those promises weren't kept. So you had this process up and down the mortgage scale from the mortgage broker at the neighborhood level, but starting with the banks on Wall Street at the top, that encouraged this housing bubble. Now, all of that analysis, and that is not the standard analysis by either of the major parties, but that analysis of what caused the crisis and the speculative housing bubble is what City Life, what we think of as a radical analysis, what led City Life to say the key demand in fighting the foreclosure crisis has to be principal reduction. Not a tweaking of interest, not an extension of the term, not putting $200,000 on the end of your mortgage that you pay in a lump sum after 25 years. None of those things, which is all what we're being offered to people, but a reduction of actually the amount that you owe to real value. In other words, reset as though the housing bubble didn't happen because it was artificial in the first place, and they knew it was going to collapse. So that demand of principal reduction, which 4 years ago when we started this was way out in left field, not that there's anything wrong with being way out in left field, I'm not going to say, but it was considered to be way out in left field. Now it's a mainstream debate. Representatives of organizations around the country, 25 of us, met in the West Wing of the White House 2 weeks ago to hear from the economic advisor that replaced Larry Summers, Gene Sperling, who said, I am 100% in favor for economic and moral reasons of your position on principal reduction. And we said, trying not to be awed by the photographs and the paintings on the wall, we said, well, then you have to fire Ed DeMarco, who's the head of FHFA that runs Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Because Ed DeMarco is standing in the way of principal reduction for half of all American mortgage, which Fannie and Freddie control. Now get this. If you want to stoke your outrage a little bit more, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are GSEs, government-supported enterprises, got huge bailouts, I think to the tune of $120 billion, paid enormous bonuses to their managers. Fannie and Freddie, and they own not only half of all the mortgages, but they own about 250,000 post-foreclosure properties. They're thinking of selling those properties bulkily to rich hedge fund investors and stuff like that at a discounted price, which is lower than what they would have to do to give principal reduction to the owners that are in those homes that were in those homes in the first place. If you want to really be outraged, think about that. These are government-supported enterprises that you and I own 79% of, and this is their policy. No principal reduction, because that would be a moral hazard to that despicable homeowner who got trapped in that underwater loan, and we want to punish him. Is that too strong to say that these banks are saying they want to punish people? Tomorrow night we're having a vigil in Hyde Park in front of the home of Levette Seals, and many other people are speaking there too. But Levette has an underwater loan. She's been approved by a nonprofit lender, Boston Community Capital, for a new mortgage. And BCC has gone to Freddie Mac and said, we'll buy the property from you for cash, for the real value, and then we'll sell it back to Levette Seals. After all, if you auction it off, that's all you're going to get anyway. And Freddie Mac said, no, we won't negotiate with you. They didn't say the price was bad. They said, we won't negotiate with you until Levette Seals is out of the house, until we evict her. So, is money the issue? Is Freddie Mac's concern for the American taxpayer the issue? No. They want to punish the owner. And that's the same policy for all the Wall Street banks. They're starting to be pushed into principal reduction by our struggle magnified around the country. But it's a slow process. Now, I think I'm running a little bit over, and I'm going to try to hurry it up. The question is, I think that we all have to ask, is with this kind of stuff going on, how come there aren't hundreds of thousands of people marching to Bank of America saying, we're going to tear your building down brick by brick until you give us principal reduction? And, you know, with due respect to all of our efforts and all of the efforts of Occupy, we don't have that level of marching going on out there. Now, we could have a whole session tonight on why that is, and we can't quite get into it, but I want to describe the struggle that we're involved, which I think has built a movement that, for me, has been the biggest movement I've been involved in 40 years of organizing. So that's significant to me, and I hope that there's people in this room that might want to build it in Quincy and be a parallel operation of what we're doing. And this is going on at 9 sites right now around New England, so it's been spreading. And we have invitations literally to go all over the country to talk about the model, to New York, Chicago, Florida, Baltimore at the end of this month, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, L.A. is all our visits that we've got set up. So, the two key demands of this movement, that the first key demand of principal reduction has tremendous power for homeowners who are frustrated by the loan modification process, can't get permanent loan modifications, or when they do, their loan modifications, like my friends Dale and last name slipped my mind, but Dale, who got a loan modification, successful permanent loan modification